Welcome to Optimal Game State. In this second video in a series, we are going to look at the mechanics of the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplaying game by Cubicle 7. In a previous video, we looked at the background for the setting. If you have no real interest in a role-playing game, that video would still have something for you. This one will not. This video is going to be very focused on the mechanics and dice, and it's going to be pretty crunchy. So if this is a game you intend to play, I recommend sticking this through. It'll give you a good idea of what's going to happen on the ground. And then we're going to build on that in the next video to look at character generation and some of the decisions that you need to make. Okay, at its core, this system is a percentile system. That means you roll two 10-sided dice, one for the tens and one for the units. So you're rolling a d100. And you are trying to roll equal to or less than your target number. Preferably, you should have dice that you can easily tell apart, like these. If you can't get dice marked for tens, then hopefully you can get some different colors. And make sure ahead of time you know which is tens and which is the units, and try stick to that. If you're stuck with two identical dice, then you can always choose to read left to right, or something like that. If you roll a 1 to 5, then the roll automatically succeeds. If you roll a 96 to 100, then it always fails. What we haven't talked about yet is the target number, though. For a lot of games, the natural inclination is to have the target number based on the difficulty of the action. Then you roll your dice. Then you look at the results, you'll add some modifiers to that result based on your skills and attributes, and you'll work out what happens. WFRP is kind of like that, but the order is mixed around. First, you start with your skill, or in rare cases, your characteristic, which will be expressed as a percentage. There are two kinds of skills, the basic and advanced. Even if you don't have anything in the basic skill, you can still roll for it, but you do need to have skills in an advanced skill before you can roll for it. Now, the difficulty of your task starts with your skill, and then that is then modified. So if you're a normal challenging task, it's going to be +0. A difficult task is going to reduce your skill by 10, while an easy task will increase that by 20. Then you roll, trying to get under that target number. So it is basically the same, but in this case, all the modifiers are happening to the target number, and your actual roll never gets modified. It is notable that the characters will typically have skills under 50%, so your GM should really be only asking for rolls where it's dramatically appropriate, because, at least initially, characters will be failing a lot. In addition to whether you succeed or fail, there are a couple of other considerations. Often you want to know how well you succeeded or how well you failed. This is called a dramatic test, and it's measured in success levels. To work out the success levels, you subtract the tens dice from the tens on the target number. And this will give you an idea of how good the success was or how bad that fail was. It's not always relevant, but it can be important. If your group is numerically challenged, there is an optional rule to just count the tens dice as your success levels. So this means you want to roll as high as possible rather than as low as possible. It does ever so slightly change the math, but it doesn't make a big difference, and it removes a step every time you roll the dice. Depending on the type of roll, success levels can have different uses. One of them it would be with an extended test. So if you're working on making a great piece of art, for example, you might spend several days working on it over multiple rolls. Then you would combine the total number of success levels to see how well you did on the final piece. In written scenarios, a GM might have a table for a specific action to compare against to see how well you've done. So to see whether you've made a Mona Lisa or it's a paint by numbers disaster. Another way to use success levels is as an opposed roll, and we will see this a lot. If two characters are haggling over a price, it's not good enough to know whether each succeeded or failed. We need to be able to compare to see who was the winningest. So what we do is we compare success levels, and the highest success level wins. The winner is then considered to have success, with success levels equal to the difference. So if the winning character had 2 success levels on their roll and the losing character had 1 success level, then the end result would be the winner has a success with 1 single success level. For working this out, failure levels do count as a minus, so you can end up increasing the number of successes for the winner, or you can have weird cases where you actually fail the roll, but still win the contest. The core book has a fun example of a pie eating competition where one character rolls a -1 success level and the other rolls a -3 success level. But that -1 then becomes a +2. So they actually win the contest but have still failed the roll. And in this case, it just determines who barfs first. Lastly, certain roles and skills may have bonuses that you can get by spending success levels. So here's an example here with the gossip skill. If you spend the night in the pub chatting with the locals, you can get to make a gossip roll. A successful roll will get you a rumor or piece of information, but additional success levels will get you more info or better quality info maybe. Depending on the circumstances, it's possible that multiple characters working together may be able to help each other out. In this case, one character is picked as the primary actor. Then the other characters are considered to be assisting. To help, you must have at least one advanced and relevant skill. You must be able to help, so you must be there. And the skill must be something that you can help with. A character can only be assisted by a number of helpers up to the tens digit of their attribute. If you're rolling to charm a guard, for example, the characteristic is fellowship. So if you've got 35% fellowship, then up to 3 other characters that have points of charm can help you. Now, each character that is helping gives you a +10 bonus, so that could be pretty big. Okay, that's the core rules, and we are going to build on that system for some specific cases. The first, obviously, is going to be combat. With life on the line, we need to take that seriously, and this system can be lethal. Combat is based on rounds, and everyone gets a turn to act within each round. Initiative is determined by the initiative characteristic, with higher initiative characters acting first. If there are ties, you compare the agility, with the highest agility going first. If that doesn't help, then you make an opposed agility contested roll, and then basically you keep testing until you have a winner. In a turn, you can move and take a single action. Typically, that'll be used to attack. You can also get some free actions like taking a potion or drawing a weapon. Unless you're using minis, movement is going to be pretty abstract. There are a few options of interest though. First, charging. If you take a charge move, then you must immediately afterwards take a melee test. Your charge must be somewhere between your movement range and your run range, which is double your walk. The bonus for charging is going to be a +10% on your melee attack, so it definitely is a help. Now, that particular rule isn't in the core book. I'll explain why later. It's some of the optional rules in Up in Arms. Also not in the core book, there is also a defend action, which will give you +20% to either dodge or melee when you're defending until the start of your next turn. But you are basically trading action to essentially go on full defense. If you are in melee and you want to get out, you can disengage. To do that, you need to succeed at a dodge roll opposed by your enemy's melee skill. Alternatively, you can flee, which means your opponent gets a free attack against you. That obviously can be bad. There are 2 kinds of attack. There is melee and there's ranged. For a melee attack, you roll your melee skill and your opponent does the same with either melee or dodge. So it's going to be an opposed roll. Whoever gets the most success levels wins. If the defender wins, the attack ends without anything else happening. So the defender doesn't get to do damage if they win. If the attacker wins, then we move on to the next step and determine the hit location. This is pretty straightforward. You basically reverse the numbers on your roll. So if you rolled a 13, then the hit location would be 31. So you check the table and 31 says right arm. We then work out the damage. Each weapon has a damage characteristic. Unarmed is 0 and the typical hand weapon is 4 damage. That will usually be modified by your strength bonus. So that's what that +SB is. And that's the tens digit of your strength. Then you also add in any success levels that you ended up with on your attack. And remember, it is an opposed roll, so that's not your basic success, but it's the difference between yours and your opponent's. That does mean if you're defending, even if you don't win, a good roll will help reduce the damage. After you calculate damage, we go on to step 4, which is to apply it. We know the damage, and we know the hit location. So we then take the damage, we subtract the target's toughness bonus. Again, that's the tens digit of the toughness characteristic. And then we subtract the armor of that location as well. So it's damage minus toughness minus the armor. And that's going to be the wounds that we're taking. If that would bring the damage to 0, then they will still suffer at least one wound. So as long as you get an attack through, it's going to do at least one, no matter how tough and how much armor there is. If they still have wounds left afterwards, they keep going. If they hit exactly 0, then they go prone, so they get knocked down. They cannot get up and will pass out in a number of turns equal to their toughness bonus. So basically, they're down on the ground, they're still conscious for a little bit longer, but they don't have the strength to get up. If the wounds done exceeds the remaining wounds, so they would go negative, then instead of going negative, you can never go negative, they do go to 0 wounds with all the effects that we talked about before, but they'll also take a critical wound. Wounds are considered to be just bruises and stretched muscles and the like, and will heal slowly over a few days rest. A typical human has about 12 wounds. Critical wounds are a little trickier and could be something like a cracked rib that'll have a lasting effect until you heal it, or a severed limb that you'll have to learn to live with, or, and there are cases on the table, it'll just mean death. As a extra element to up the lethality of combat, we have criticals and fumbles in melee and in range tests. This happens when your 10s dice and your units dice are the same, so 11, 22, 33, and so on. If the roll is succeeding, then it's a crit, and it automatically triggers a critical wound on the opponent, regardless of whatever else is happening. And it's an additional thing. Now, for that, you do need to roll a d100 again to determine the location. If the roll fails, then it's a fumble, and you roll on the fumble table. Notably, you can crit or fumble when defending with a melee against an attack. So you can have cases where you're trying to cut down a goblin and he will randomly crit and could potentially chop your head off. After the effects of a critical hit are determined, if you have armor on that location, then you have the option to take a critical deflection instead. This means the armor managed to save you from the effects of the critical hit, but it does get damaged in the process. The armor loses 1 AP, and you ignore the critical hit for now. Range attacks are similar, but the defender doesn't get to roll against them. So you just need to succeed at your normal roll, and your success levels aren't reduced, because it's not an opposed roll. It's not all great though, so you can't use a ranged weapon when you're engaged in melee, unless it's a pistol. Also, if you're at point blank range, then the defender can roll melee or dodge to try to pose a roll. Also, if the defender has a shield of size 2 or bigger, and the attacker is in line of sight, then they can try use the melee to kind of dodge behind the shield and avoid the shot or the arrow. Alright, not too bad. Page 161 of the core rulebook has a table of combat difficulties. Like we talked about with normal rolls, difficulty can be adjusted based on certain circumstances. So here, if the defender is large, like an ogre, you might get a plus 20 bonus to your skill because it's a lot easier to hit. If you're trying to hit a target at a specific location, you can take a call shot. So that'll give you minus 20 to your skill, but it will help you avoid a knight's armor and maybe go straight for a headshot. There are a bunch of different options on that table. It might be worth keeping this one close. And close in it in the book, there's also a few other combat options like 2 weapon fighting, unarmed combat, and mounted combat, pulling your blows, stuff like that. We're not going to go into it here. Maybe have a read through them as they come up. There's also a section in there in relation to conditions. So conditions like being prone, blinded, ablaze. Again, those are all very situational things that have special rules written up for them. I would recommend that when they come up, just refer to the rulebook and kind of work your way through it. One thing we probably should mention, though, is size differences. If you have a halfling or an ogre in your party, this is going to come up a lot. These rules are kind of hidden away on page 341 of the core book under the bestiary section, so it is easy to miss. Humans, elves, and dwarfs are average size, and halflings and gnomes are small, with ogres being large. When attacking, if you're larger than your target, then your weapon gains a damaging quality, which lets it use either of the 2 dice when working out success levels. And so you can, if you want, you could reverse the 10s and the units. And if you're 2 steps larger, it also gains the impact quality, which adds the units dice of the attack to the damage done. So if you roll 35, you're adding an extra 5 damage. Damage is also multiplied by the number of steps difference. So an ogre attacking a halfling, which is 2 steps different, would double the damage. Finally, a successful hit activates the optional rule Death Blow. which means after you kill a target in a melee attack, you can then step in and take another attack. If you're smaller than the target, when you're attacking them, you do get a plus 10% bonus on your attack, as the target is much bigger than you, but that's really the only perk. When you defend with melee, if you end up with -2 success levels, so it is often better to dodge if you're one of the small ones. You'll also have to deal with fear if you're being attacked by something larger than you, so that'd be a human attacking a halfling, or an ogre attacking a human. That turns into terror if it's 2 steps, like an ogre attacking a halfling. So being small is not great in this game. The next thing I want to talk about is the advantage system. And the first thing we're going to do is completely ignore the advantage system in the core rulebook and instead use the group advantage system in the Up in Arms book. With group advantage, we don't have to track the individual advantage. So instead, there's an ally advantage pool for heroes and an adversary advantage pool for the bad guys. At the start of an encounter, the GM has the option to seed the advantage pool. So rather than having them both start at 0, there's a few points already in there based on a tactical situation at the start of the fight. Is one group surprised? Does a group have the higher ground? Kind of stuff like that. The standard way to add advantage to pool is to win an opposed roll that you initiated. So if you swing and hit an opponent, you're probably also generating a point of advantage. If you manage to wound an opponent without having to make an opposed roll, you'll also gain a point of advantage, although it's only once per round. So you're going to get that when you're firing in, or when you're shooting a bow. Also, you're going to be able to do damage, and it's not going to be opposed. Or casting spell, I guess. If you're one of the mainline combat fighters, you can try use your skills. Sorry, if you're one of the non-mainline combat fighters, so if you're the medic of the party or you're the lawyer or whatever, you can try to use some of your skills to get tactical advantage. So this is the assess action. For example, what you could do is you could use a medicine skill to work out that an enemy has a dodgy leg or something like that. Then you pass that information to the group, and that gives +2 advantage to the pool. And then maybe one of the more martial focused characters will be able to use that. So it does mean that even the non-combat focused characters can get involved in the fights. There are 5 ways to use advantage. For one advantage, you can batter an opponent. So this is where you use your brute strength to defeat a more skilled opponent. It's an opposed strength test, and if you win, you knock the target prone. For one advantage, you can trick your opponent. You perform a opposed agility test, and if you win, you can apply a condition to them that's narratively appropriate. So that might be, throwing a candle onto them and setting them on fire. It might be, throwing dirt in their eyes so they're blinded. Stuff like that. And these are all conditions with additional rules, so it is something to go check up. For 2 advantage points, you can get +10% bonus on an ability, and you can spend an additional advantage at 1 per 10% to get a bigger bonus. So for 4 points, the first 2 would get you that 10%, and then the next 2 would get you another 20 for a total of 30% of a bonus. If things look bad, you can spend 2 advantage points to get out of melee range without penalty and without having to make a dodge check. Finally, 4 advantage points will give you an extra action. So the group will work together to generate advantage and then funnel that advantage into wherever it's going to be the most useful. I've heard of several groups using melee fighters in the front lines to generate group advantage, winning those opposed melee tests, and then giving a caster at the back all that advantage to turn into a big fireball to finish off the bad guys. All right, that is a ton of stuff already, but we're not quite done yet. We still need to look at magic. There are 2 kinds to consider, and they both work differently. So there's divine and arcane. For divine casters, things are relatively easy. There are 2 talents of interest, bless and invoke. The bless talent lets you grant minor benefits from your deity, while invoke lets you ask for more powerful miracles. Each deity has their own list of blessings and miracles. In each case, you're going to be rolling the praise skill, and the more successes and the more success levels you get, the greater the effect. There are 3 typical ways that you can use those success levels to boost it. So for blessings, each 2 success levels can increase the range by 6 yards, the duration by 6 rounds, or the number of targets by 1. Miracles are similar, but as they can be bigger and fancier. Each 2 successes are used to add the starting value to the range, duration, or number of targets. So 2 successes could increase the range of a miracle that starts at 50 yards to 100 yards, and then another 2 would push it up to 150 yards. So it's always going to be taking the initial base of the spell, of the blessing of miracle, and then of the miracle, and then boosting it up. For arcane magic and the other variants like hedge magic or chaos magic, we look over at the Winds of Magic sourcebook, which has varied rules to address some of the issues from the core book. The basic way to cast a spell is with the language magic test. Again, you want to be successful and you want to gather success levels that can be used for bonus effects. Spells do have crits and fumbles and do have their own special effects with a miscast table. Most casters will be looking to get the instinctive diction talent as well, as without that, you actually roll on the miscast table if you crit. That just meant that the parry spell gets a little out of hand despite doing what you wanted it to do. Spending the time to get special ingredients for your spells, which will cost you cash, will also help reduce major miscasts to minor ones and minor miscasts to no effect. So yeah, invest in that, keep things safe. For touch spells, you will also need touch the target, which you do in the opposed melee brawling test. So that mightn't be something you're considering initially, but if you have those spells, it might be something to invest in. Now, in that case, you are only looking to succeed at the roll rather than worrying about success levels. If you can get your hands on a magic item like a staff, you could channel your touch attack through that staff. And in that case, you would roll a melee staff skill instead. Spells are not easy to cast, however. You need to do more than just succeed at the roll. Each spell has a different casting number, and to successfully cast a spell, you need to get success levels equal to or greater than that number. The Great Fires of Uzul, for example, in this case, is similar to the classic Fireball, and it has a casting number of 10. That means you need to get 10 successes before it even starts. And then if you manage to get 12 successes, for example, you would then have 2 left over to be able to boost the effects. Now, obviously, more difficult spells should be harder to cast, but the casting numbers are typically quite high. So, to successfully cast spells like this, we need to do something. We need to channel. Channeling is similar to casting, but instead of trying to cast a spell, you're just trying to accumulate successes to reduce the casting number down to 0. Successes will carry over to the next turn, so you could channel over 2 or 3 turns, and then once you're ready to cast a spell, those successes can be used to reduce the casting number. Now, that is to a minimum of 0. You can't bring it down to like -5 and essentially get extra bonuses. Rather than using the language magic skill here, you're using the channeling skill. As with normal casting, crits and fumbles can happen, and you will want to pick the etheric attunement talent as soon as you can to avoid critical successes triggering a miscast. Rather than adding extra damage, a crit in this case will add extra success levels equal to your willpower bonus. Okay. While channeling, taking any damage or anything else that might break your concentration will mean having to take a -20% cool check, or you lose all of the successes and you end up with it being a miscast. Now, this does mean you will need to take a few different turns to get a spell off, so it'll be a turn to channel and then a turn to actually cast a spell at the very least. But there are ways to speed it up. So the War Wizard talent, for example, gives you a free action to cast a spell with casting number of 5 or less. Alternatively, you can use group advantage and spend 4 advantage points to get that extra action on the turn you get channeled. Once you do manage to get the spell off, you should hopefully have some extra successes to play with. These can be quite powerful, so in the Winds of Magic there is a table on how you can spend them. This table is a lot more restrictive than the old version of the core book. Here you can only pick one entry from each column. So if you wanted to have +2 targets and +3 damage, that would be 5 success levels for the extra targets and another 3 success levels for the damage. So as a caster, one of your priorities is going to be getting as many success levels as possible. The key to that is the etheric attunement and the instinctive diction talents, which we talked about earlier. These both remove miscasts from successful crits. But All talents do something else that often gets missed out. Well, some do, not all. Some, like these ones, are linked to a skill, and each time you successfully use that skill, you get an extra success level for each level of the talent. So taking etheric attunement multiple times will help you get additional success in your channeling, which will help you get them faster, and multiple instinctive dictions will help you get additional success levels to have fun with and boost your actual spells once you cast them. Definitely talents to invest for as a caster, and we'll talk about that in a later video. Sometimes you will actually stick at a certain level to be able to pick this up multiple times rather than moving on. Other talents, incidentally, are similar, so keep an eye out for ones like Fent, which, in addition to letting you make the Fent action, gives you an extra success level when you do. There are a lot of them, and it is only a minor subbar, so it is something people regularly miss out on. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. The last thing I want to talk about is faith and resilience. Faith and resilience. WFRP is a dangerous game, and bad things happen, but the players each have a pool of reserves that push them ahead of the average folk. Each character has a fate and a resilience stat, which are related to your fortune and resolve pools. Your fate pool is refreshed at the start of every session, and your resilience pool is restored through role-playing actions out that match your character's motivation. They both provide minor bonuses. Fortune can be used to reroll a failed test. It can be used to add one success level to a test after it was rolled, or to ignore the initiative order and just act at your preferred time. Resolve can be used to become immune to psychological effects for a round, so that's things like fear. You can use it to ignore penalties from critical wounds for a round, and you can remove a condition like blinded or prone. Fate and resilience can also be spent, but they're a much more limited resource. Your GM may choose to give your character a fate point for an act of extreme heroism, bravery, or significance. Similarly, an act of great importance to your motivation may have your GM grant you a point of resilience. For the most part, though, assume you'll only have the ones you start the game with for the rest of the campaign, so use them wisely. These can be spent for a big impact, though. A point of fate can be spent to survive where you would otherwise die, but you're taken out for the rest of the combat. This is the safe option. Alternatively, you can spend a point of pain to avoid the damage in a lucky fluke, but the character still remains in danger. That means they can keep fighting and help the group out, but they could still die. Resilience can be spent to not gain a mutation when you otherwise would. Haven't really talked about corruption a lot, just to say you don't want to start getting tentacles for arms. Alternatively, you can spend resilience to pick the result of a roll and just succeed, even if you've already failed that roll. So it's really, really powerful, but very, very limited. All right, we have gone through a lot today, but hopefully that should give you enough to start your first game of Warhammer with some confidence. More importantly, it should also give you an idea of what you need to focus on when you're creating your character. And that's something we'll talk about in the next video.
Thanks for making it all the way to the end. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Each week I put up a new video talking about one of Games Workshop's specialist games. The goal is always to try and make the best possible two-player experience. If this is something you'd find interesting, please subscribe to the channel and comment to let me know what you'd like to see in future.